My name is Jacqueline Woodson, and I write fiction and poetry. I first loved writing when I learned to write my name, which is Jacqueline Amanda Woodson. And my sister taught me how to write it. And I just remember making the letters and being fascinated that letters made words and words made sentences, and that you put a sentence on a page and it said something. Like, there was such a power to that, even at a real, I was like 3, 4, 5, and realizing that this is how the world moved, was through words. And so from a really young age, by the time I was 7, I was like, I want to be a writer. I don't care if writing means writing Jacqueline Amanda Woodson a million times. I want to find a way to do this in my life. I had always, when I started writing, wrote from the perspective of someone between the ages of 10 and say 17, but it was from an adult perspective looking back. And so I started reading a lot more young adult literature and realizing that that voice was more immediate, and that voice was one that I was more tapped into, because those were such random and important years in my life, so I just started writing. Some of the challenges of going to places that I haven't historically been. I've never been a young African American male. I've never been a white Jewish girl. I've never been really poor or really wealthy. Is keeping it real, keeping it honest, and not telling a story that is just about kind of stealing from that population because it's rich in material. So when I go to that place, it's really about starting from something I know. I don't know what it is to be a young African American boy, but I know what it is to be African American, and I know what it is to be young. I don't know what it is to be a white girl, but I know what it is to be a girl and to have felt invisible in that respect. So I really start from an honest place and try to move forward from that. And I kind of have this sense that, at the core of it, there is a universal element to us all, a humanness. And so really kind of trying to break the characters down that way. Almost Summer Sky. It's a poem that is kind of moving toward the end of the book, and it's, I guess, what's considered a poem written in free verse. There's not a rule to the line breaks. There's not the rhyme and meter A, B, A, B, A, B. It's just kind of falls where it falls. The lines fall where they fall, and it's about the shape of the poem on the page. It was the trees first, Rodney tells me. It's raining out, but the rain is light and warm. And I think the great thing about the white space around the poem is it allows for there not to be all of the stimuli going into the brain. You just have those words on the page and kind of air around it to allow you to let the poem sink in. And the sky's not all close to us like it gets sometimes. It's way up there with some blue showing through. Late spring sky, Miss Marcus says. Almost summer sky. Light is important to me. I just think it talks about so many different aspects of our lives. You can use it to talk about sadness. You can use it to talk about joy. You can use it to talk about hope, the way it comes in, the way it's constantly, as you can see, changing. And when she said that, I said, hey, Miss Marcus, that's a good title for a poem, right? In terms of thinking about Lonnie, who's this young boy of African American descent, who's coming from Brooklyn, New York, who comes from a very different type of background, his poetry is going to reflect who he is, and I think that's what good poetry does. You have a poet's heart, Lonnie. That's what Miss Marcus said to me. I have a poet's heart. I think one thing that's hard is in our society, everything has to be done quickly. Kids are being forced to read quickly, to write quickly, to talk quickly, to do a whole bunch of different activities in an organized manner and in a quick manner, and there's not this room for free space. And I think a lot of times poetry allows that room, but it means sitting down with the poem and reading it again and again and again and again, and each time letting it affect you in a different way. I'm not organized enough to keep a notebook to write stuff down in. When the ideas come to me, I write on whatever I have. If I'm walking to the store and I have a napkin, I write on the napkin. A lot of times I write on my hand. I always have a pen on me somewhere, but I don't always have paper. And so I basically write when I can on whatever I can. Sometimes I write in the back of books I'm reading if the ideas come to me there. When I sit down to write, it's usually because there is a voice in my head. And as a result, my novels are mostly character-driven, meaning there's a person telling the story. And so usually when I sit down, that person is already in my head telling the story. This whole book's a poem because every time I try to tell the whole story, my mind goes, be quiet, only it's not my mind's voice, it's Miss Edna's. That's Lonnie Collins' motion. I don't know who it is yet. I just know there's this boy. I know he's young. I know he's writing a poem book. And so all of that information is in my head, and then I start writing what the words that are in my head and moving toward figuring out, okay, he's in the 5th grade, he's African American, his parents have died, he's separated from his sister, he's Miss Edna. Who is Miss Edna? Miss Edna is his foster mom. So all that stuff starts coming to me once I give myself the chance to sit down and write it. Now that I have a daughter, I have a lot less time to write, and so I have to get more disciplined about when and how I write. And I have those bits and pieces of paper, and I know I'm already thinking in my head how they're fitting into the thing I'm thinking about, if it's an article, if it's a book, if it's a picture book. And when I get the time to sit down and write, by the time I'm sitting down and writing, I'm in the role of writing. So I'm writing a lot of stuff toward that end product of whatever it's going to be. I never outline. I never know where a story is going. I never know how it's going to end. So I just sit down and I start writing and pulling in those bits and pieces and seeing where they fit into this. I am always writing something, and I'm usually working on more than one book at a time. And when I get bored with one, I move to the other one. I get bored with that one, I move back to that one, or I move on to a new one. And they're usually in different genres. Like I'll write a picture book and a young adult book, or a young adult book and an adult book, or an adult book and an article, and I go back and forth. But they're usually very different in terms of what they're talking about. I think the first thing I get out of writing is finishing a book and thinking, wow, I've just told a story. I've just written a whole story. And then I get, wow, I've just written a good story. And then I get, well, I've just written a story that's done, that's good, that is impacting the world somehow. And so I'm really conscious of stuff. I'm really conscious of my representation of people, of, across economic class lines and gender. I'm not going to ascribe roles to girls just because that's who girls are supposed to be in our society. Or if there's an African American boy, he's not going to be someone who's going to run and snatch a purse, because that's the stereotype. And I want to write against those stereotypes. And I want to write, I just want people to see people as human. And so I think that's the social part of it. And I think in the writing, because that's so much a part of who I am, like how I think every day, I'm not conscious of how I'm doing it, when I'm doing it, until but when I put someone on the page, I go, well, what does this mean? If I have this boy do this, what does this mean? Because once the book is out in the world, it's not mine anymore. It's there for people to do whatever they want and deconstruct it, or feel bad because of the portrayal of the people in it, or whatever the situation is. So I do feel like I have a responsibility as an author to not step on anyone's throat, to not tell someone's story for them, but also not to paint them in a light that's going to make our society even more fearful of them, or even more hating of them. The people who are resistant to writing are resistant to telling their stories because they're afraid that people are going to react somehow to them. And, there must be something to that story to fear a reaction. And any kind of reaction is a good reaction to me. It's a question of being brave. I think a lot of people are scared. I think a lot of young people are scared to reveal themselves. And so they think, if I write that, people are going to think this about me. Or if I write that, people are going to think this about me. Instead of thinking, what, if I write that, it's going to be brilliant. And, people are going to say, you're brilliant. This is amazing.